Trust in the journey, trust in the unfolding of what's happening. Don't try and control it so much because it doesn't look like how you want it to look. Be in your life rather than constantly looking for something outside of it. You know, the expectations we have of what our life should look like is often the thing that damages us even getting there.
If you're a man, kind of 45 plus, and you've been feeling for a while like you're not quite yourself, like you're feeling a bit unhappy maybe, low level anxiety, lack of confidence, not quite sure where your life's going, then don't ignore that feeling because it is not going to go away on its own.
When we have a strong foundation of a relationship, a partnership, it just gives you more a sense of safety, of possibility, that security to actually start flourishing in your own ways.
Are you making time for those deep conversations? Are you making time where your partner really feels heard and understood? And the stats at the moment are saying that most divorces now are being triggered by midlife women.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Life's Second Act. This is the podcast that delves into the challenges, the new directions and some uncertainties that can come during midlife. And I do that through talking to people who have a story to tell, an insight to share, or a snippet of something special. My name's Simon Burgess, and in this episode, I'm speaking with Claire and James Davis. Claire is 45 and James is 52. They've run one of Europe's most successful luxury fitness retreat companies since 2012, 38 Degrees North, trained thousands of clients, won multiple awards, and received some very positive press and praise. To expand their reach and specifically help midlifers, they created the Midlife Mentors podcast that's been running since 2019 and have designed the Midlife Reset Transformational Program. So who better to speak to about some of the challenges we have in midlife? So welcome to the show, Claire and James.
Hello, Simon. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you for having us, Simon.
Good stuff. So I want to dive into a couple of topics today. Generally finding passion and purpose in midlife, but also because I've got the benefit of both of you there, a husband and wife team, I'd like to explore how we can navigate some of those personal relationships that we have with our husband, wife or partner. But before we get into that, many of us may be struggling with purpose and passion and new directions. And I'm sort of assuming that you're probably in a good place in terms of where you're going at the moment. But was life always like that? Claire, let me start with you.
Yeah, because it's an interesting story because I actually spent 15 years of the beginning of my adult work life not liking what I did and constantly trying to get out of it. So I went into PR and marketing, and my first job was in 1999 at Harrods, which was when R5 was still there, but that's a complete side point. So I started off, and I already knew actually as soon as I went into it that I didn't like it. It wasn't really my thing. And so on a soul level, I suppose, there was always this part of me that was like, there's got to be something more than this. I found it quite vacuous. I found it quite backstabby. I was working on brands after Harrods that I didn't enjoy. And so I was like, there must be more that I can do with my life than this. So for 15 years, I was in a really bad place, trying lots of different things. I actually qualified as a life coach at the age of 24 because I knew I wanted to do something around coaching. And I'd had my own coach earlier on, when I was around 22. And when I became a stress management consultant, I was trying all these different things. And I was actually became a freelancer in PR so I could do all those different things. So then I became a business coach for Microsoft on the side, stress management, life coaching. So it was a really difficult point until I found what I do now, which was 10 years ago. Up until that, it was really in and out, I couldn't find my life's purpose, I suppose. And it was only going through a divorce myself and being put on antidepressants and just being in a really dark night of the soul that I discovered health. Like I'd always struggled with body dysmorphia and actually had always really restricted calories, but had never really looked after my nutrition, definitely never exercised properly. And it was only going through that dark night of my soul and not wanting to be on antidepressants forever that I got into health. And then all of a sudden, it all kind of fitted into place. I became so interested in nutrition, so interested in exercise because it saved me. Like it really helped me get my power back after my divorce. And so then I kind of put the psychology side and the health and fitness side, I suppose, and the soulful side all together. And that's when I really realised that that was the thing that I wanted to do. And then I met James, who was on a really similar path to me, actually. And that was my story for a really, really long time. I knew that there was going to be something more. And until it fitted into place, I was kind of lost at sea, really.
James, what about yourself?
Yeah, well, I've had a fair few pivots along the way, I think.
Pivot.
Yeah. I've always been fascinated by human behaviour. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at school. There were people around me that are like, oh, yeah, I definitely want to be a lawyer, and it's just like there's a clear track there, a trajectory. But I didn't. So I thought, I'm fascinated by human behaviour. I went and studied psychology, loved it, went on to do a master's in psychology, even started working as a psychologist for a while. But my other passion was writing. So then an opportunity came along through some of the freelance work I've been doing to launch a project for Ministry of Sound, which was their magazine. So I became heavily involved in that, which was great as a 20-year-old, flying around the world, going to clubs and writing about it and being immersed in it. But as time went on, that lifestyle wasn't as sustainable. So I moved more into the executive side of the functions, business development, commercial, and I worked through a succession of media companies. I launched the mobile services for the Times and the Sun. I went on to MTV to work across their emerging networks, selling Nickelodeon, MTV, Comedy Central. And it was good and I enjoyed it, but I always felt there was something else. So in 2011, moved to Ibiza, which I obviously knew from my Ministry of Sound days. And I had really the idea of equipping people with the psychological tools they needed, as well as understanding movement and nutrition. And that's where the retreats company, 38 Degrees North, started. That was a real struggle. It was a real shock working for myself after being in a corporate environment. So that was a steep learning curve. We got it to a place that was going really well. Then COVID, of course, came along. So that shut our retreats for a good 2 years. We'd always been saying, we should do more in the online space. And we'd launched a podcast, Midlife Mentors. And we're like, okay, well, let's look at what we could do for midlifers. What are the issues that are facing midlifers? What are we seeing our clients that are coming to retreats present with over and over again? So that was really the foundation for the work we started doing, with a really integrated approach, looking at the psychological tools you need, the scientific backed ways to move, to nourish yourself, all the rest of it, understanding what's going on with hormones and the impact that has. And we've kind of gone from there, but it's interesting. So I guess we're kind of in a mid-pivot at the moment. So we've been doing the Midlife Reset for nearly 5 years, the program we offer, the group coaching program. And I decided just to close the doors on that now, because we're feeling like it's been really successful. We've trained hundreds of clients through that and changed their lives, but we're just feeling a calling to move more into the corporate space. We're doing a lot more corporate work around things like menopause, low testosterone, relationships, communication. But in particular, what we're starting to look at now is the problem of ageism, really. So we have so many clients that kind of hit their 50s and struggle to find a new role, or else are in their role and find they don't really feel fulfilled or valued anymore. So they then either drop out or just carry on feeling unfulfilled. So we're starting to look at how we angle into that and start to work with organisations to help their older, more experienced workers feel more valued and fulfilled in the roles they've got.
So let's talk about that. What are some of these challenges that we have in midlife? I know personally I'm sort of going through a journey myself. One day I'll feel quite positive, and other days I'm sort of thinking I'm really not quite sure what I'm doing. What are some of these blockers that we have? And through your experience of coaching people and your own personal journeys, what can you share about this finding direction and purpose and passion in midlife? What's your thoughts on all that?
Oh, so much. And actually, like you're saying there, our experience, we're kind of going through that shift as well, and I do think this goes in peaks and troughs. We're definitely going through a change of values, ourselves and what we want, and that level of fulfillment. We weren't as fulfilled in the Midlife Reset program that we wanted to be. So we were kind of like, okay, why is that change? What might we want to do next? But I think a lot of the time it's that our values change so much from when we were in our 20s and 30s, maybe into our 40s. But actually, when we get into our 40s, 50s, our values have really, really changed. What we want from our life, when we're younger, we really play to win. And then this is another point, actually, when we kind of reach our midlife, we play not to lose. So we've got all of this stuff. We've created all this stuff, all these material possessions, the status, all these things that we think make us valuable in society. So we don't want to lose that. So we become really risk adverse. But the values piece, at the same time, we're being pulled in this other direction of, oh, I don't want to lose that, but also there must be more to my life than this. My values have necessarily changed from competition and get as much as I can to actually, what can I give back? Instead of just being this human doing, what can I be instead? Like, what do I want to be more present in my life for the people that I love? I want to feel a sense of belonging, that I matter, that I'm seen, that I'm heard on a deeper level. So that's what I see. It's almost like a very spiritual moment. And that does have, contrary to belief, we might not necessarily know this, but that has a lot to do with our physiological changes that are happening at midlife. So I'm sure James will talk about hormones in a minute. But yeah, there's a real deep shift. It's almost kind of there's a transformation, a butterfly kind of wanting to come out. But we feel that kind of risk adverseness, and we're quite terrified of losing all the things that we were told were going to make us happy, but strangely haven't.
Yeah.
So you're right. We can really go on this roller coaster of up and down. One day we're going, yeah, I really feel like this pull towards something more me. And then there's this dip where we're like, oh my goodness, but who am I if I'm not all these things that I've built around me?
I don't know whether I was particularly aware of what might end up happening. It's only through talking to others that I've realised that I'm not alone. And this is a thing, as you say, Claire, that sort of happens to us. James, what's your thoughts? From a guy's perspective, do men and women look at this period differently, do you think?
I think there are similarities between the genders, and then also some big differences. So I think the similarities are, midlife is, for some reason, I guess it's the point in our life cycle where we naturally kind of take stock of where we are, and we kind of look back at the younger us and what our aspirations were and see whether we've got there or not. If we have got there, is it actually what we expected and what we wanted? So there's that whole thing. At the same time, we're probably juggling aging parents. Kids might be now at that age where they're leaving home, so we might have prioritized a lot of other things, and finally the time's coming where we could start to prioritize ourselves a bit more, but we don't quite know in what direction to do that. As Claire said, our values might have changed, and we're just kind of starting to realize that. I think COVID kind of sped up people's awareness of realizing that their values had changed. Suddenly they've been in a job. We tend to lurch from day to day. Suddenly being at home, locked down, you're like, well, what am I doing? Do I even want to do this? So I think that sped things up. What we see in Western society, there's a lot of focus on looking at the external things. So, if we're feeling unfit, we've put on too much weight, we'll go to the gym or do a workout or do a diet. But there's not so much focus on looking at what's going on for us with the hormonal and neurotransmitter changes and how that's affecting our psychology, and what we need to be doing as regular practice for our mindset there. So, as Claire said, research shows we become more risk averse as we age, and there's understandable reasons for that. But how can we be more aware of that, for example, and learn to take more opportunities, like learn to take more calculated risks so we continue in growth? When we work with clients or when we go to organizations, there's a number of tools that we can roll out, help people identify, what are their values, what are their passions, where are those overlapping, what does the world need, what can they be paid for? Because it might be, you might have an amazing hobby that you love, which is fine to do as a hobby, but it's not going to pay the bills. But what's maybe something related to that could do it? So it's helping people explore those areas.
Yeah.
But, I think, midlife crisis was coined as a phrase in the late 50s, early 60s for a reason. But I think we need to see it as an opportunity for midlife transformation. We've still got, much further ahead of us now than we did back then.
Yeah.
So let's make the most of it.
You talk about hormones. Obviously, we understand, and increasingly in society, we understand about the menopause. But James, things happen for guys too, don't they? Which it's only really recently, listening to and seeing some of your stuff online, that I've started to understand a little bit more about how testosterone can play into this midlife crisis, how we're feeling in midlife at all.
Undoubtedly so,
Massively.
Simon. Yeah. So, I mean, it's great that there is so much awareness now around the menopause, and obviously that needs to continue to grow so women can feel more supported, because there are still gaps there. But for men, it's really overlooked. Sadly, the highest suicide cohort is midlife men. We can't say that's directly related to testosterone, but in most autopsies of male suicides, they have low testosterone. We do know for men, so our main sex hormone is testosterone. It peaks in our 20s and then will decline at between 1% to 3% per year. By the time we're in our 50s, it could be 30 to 50% lower. So whereas women have a relatively narrow window in their lives where they go through perimenopause and menopause. So the changes are actually more dramatic for them because it's happening in a compressed space of time. For men, it's very gradual. It's like this drip, drip, drip. But then we get to that point where we are noticing that like, oh, I'm losing strength. I'm losing muscle mass. My metabolism slowed, so I'm putting more and more weight around my midsection. My energy is not what it used to be. I'm feeling less confident. I've got low level anxiety. My libido's completely shot. Like, what's going on here? Now, that can obviously play into midlife crisis because men tend to be, I think, more wrapped up in their physicality. It could start to affect them in their job roles. They could start to question that, and at the same time, we have this whole issue of ageism at work where older people are likely to be more experienced and senior, so they're being paid higher wages. So a company might think, oh, it's a bigger cost saving to get rid of that person, replace it with a younger person or AI, but they're really overlooking a lot of factors. And then there's, of course, with these changes to physicality, libido, psychology, there can be the impact on relationships as well, particularly if the female partner's going through menopause, and then that in itself can cause further drivers. So there's kind of all these interconnected cogs that can drive this process, yeah.
So with menopause, I understand there are treatments for women. What's the solution for a guy? Is it a similar kind of process? Do you go to your doctors about it?
Yeah, the simple answer is there is a similar kind of process. So the first step would be if you think you have some of the symptoms of low testosterone, which could be, and they can, like the menopause, they can be confused with aging, right? So it's like low energy levels, lack of confidence, all the things I just mentioned. You go to your doctor and ask for a blood test for testosterone levels. Now, the thing is, that's only going to tell you your overall testosterone. So that becomes slightly tricky in that could be low, in which case, you probably would want to look at what the next steps are. But we have what we call overall and free testosterone. So 98% of testosterone we have is bound. It's being utilized in processes in the body. So that 2% free is what's really, really important because that's what's going to actually give us that, that oomph that we're missing. So if we want to get a test that will show us overall and free. But if your testosterone is low, I'd say always start with lifestyle adjustments first. So we know there are things you can do with your lifestyle to naturally boost testosterone, which would be, exercising in certain ways, particularly lifting weights for men, high intensity training with adequate recovery, cutting out processed foods, sugar from the diet, lowering alcohol levels. Things like that will help raise testosterone. Then you can go for the medicalized route, which is actually testosterone replacement therapy. So like women have HRT for hormones, men can have TRT. But it's a little bit more nuanced because there's a few things we have to be aware of as men. For women, their estrogen is tapering away, so it makes sense to replace it. For men, if we replace our testosterone, we keep producing testosterone for all our lives. But if we start to introduce an external source, we'll shut down our own natural production.
Okay.
So it's not something we can go on for, I'll do it for 12 months and then stop because our own production. So it's a lifelong decision.
Okay.
That's the main thing to be aware of. There are contraindications for some people with certain types of cancers like prostate. And if you're planning on still having children, it can make you infertile as well. There are ways around that. But again, that's something to speak to you about. But the short answer is that yes, there is a therapy available, which is testosterone replacement.
Interesting. Wasn't aware of that. So thank you for sharing that. Claire, so when we talk about a midlife crisis or change and finding direction and purpose, often I think about it as being guys that have a midlife crisis. How would you define it for a woman?
Really?
I think midlife divorce, if you get the statistics.
Yeah, it's a really good question because actually the reality is a midlife crisis is definitely, that label is definitely put on men, which I do feel is an unfair because, we make a mockery of it and that makes actually men probably feel even less comfortable coming forward and saying I'm actually struggling because they don't want to be labelled as having like the midlife crisis. So it's not a helpful term at all to label guys with that. I do think that, midlife crisis isn't really something that us women label ourselves with. It's not something I would say to a woman, oh, you're going through your midlife crisis. I suppose it does come down to that perimenopause and menopause stage. For us, I'm very, very clear about wanting to be as positive as we can about perimenopause and menopause. There is so much talk about how devastating it is. And don't get me wrong, perimenopause and menopause can be very, very, very difficult for some women, very. However, I always think it's really important to have the flip side of that, which is actually for us women. When I do workshops on menopause, especially menopause in work and allyship at work, I always put a slide in about the positive sides of menopause. Sometimes, even if I'm doing it online, I can almost see some eyes rolling. But what I find with women that I coach and have coached for many, many years now is, yes, we're going through this difficult time, but we're going through that chrysalis. We're going through, I said about that butterfly coming out. It's almost like the marking at the end of our periods is almost very freeing at the same time. And it marks the time where we start using the wisdom that comes with age. The word hag has a really negative connotations, but actually when you look back over history, if you look back at our ancestors, those women that got into these later years were revered as having the most wisdom. Lots of people went to these women because they had so much knowledge and wisdom, and they had a lot of power. They really stepped into their power. So I really see that in the women that I coach and that I work with. They step into their creativity more. They step into their power. They set down their boundaries. They don't give a flying F about the stuff that they used to worry about. They prioritize themselves more. So there's a real sense that, yes, women are struggling maybe with the physical and emotional and psychological symptoms, but there is this other side where we really start to move into our real selves.
Interesting. So that brings us nicely, I think, onto how we know men and women can be quite different. So when we talk about navigating our relationships in midlife, bearing in mind we now know that men and women are looking at things differently, they're having different emotions and going through different physical changes. How do we manage those relationships when you may be struggling with your own personal one, let alone worrying about what your husband, wife or partner's going through?
Yeah.
How do we do that?
It's a great question. I think it's a multifaceted answer. I'd say the first thing is, acknowledge that you are going through your own stuff and it's your responsibility to get on top of that. So, educate yourself, seek help if you need it, seek support, because yes, you can meet the other person where they're at, but it's going to help if you're in better shape yourself and you're doing your own work on yourself. For the relationship itself, I say the key thing is communication, really. And this is where it tends to break down. And you talk about the differences between women and men. So it's interesting, the stats at the moment are saying that most divorces now are being triggered by midlife women. And I think this, I'm just hypothesizing here, this could be due to a difference in the way men and women will endure a relationship, shall I put. So I think a man will kind of think, if everything just seemed okay, that's all right, and I'll just keep my head down and keep quiet. Whereas a woman wisdom that Claire was talking about will be like, you know what, I'm really not happy with this. I'm not getting enough emotional support. So I'm leaving, I'm out the door. And obviously, if we love our partner, we want to prevent that happening. So I think it's a question of stepping up. And I think a thing men are guilty of is, I'm not talking for all men, but a lot of men I've observed, we mistake proximity for intimacy. So, men will sometimes be surprised when women's voices her unhappiness in a relationship. And we're like, oh, what's wrong? I come home every night, we sit and watch telly and that's it. But being physically close to someone isn't the same as having intimacy. Are you making time for those deep conversations? Are you making time where your partner really feels heard and understood? Are you looking in each other's eyes when you say it? Are you expressing how you're feeling and what's going on for you? And I think this is what both partners need to do, but men in particular need to start stepping up and going, hey, this is me. This is how I'm feeling today. So if I act like that, that's why. I'd love to know what's going on with you. And just really open that dialogue up. Start being vulnerable about it and start showing that you're really listening and understanding the other person.
I think sometimes one of the things that we talk about projection. So I think a lot of the time we can assume things. So if we've been with someone a long time, we can completely assume what they're thinking all the time. And actually, because we've changed so much, we don't necessarily feel like we know that person anymore. So because we're going through this massive transition, our values have changed, our hormones, all that kind of stuff, it actually might be a process of getting to know that person again. Like James said, We're confusing being close to that person to actually being close to the person that we've become.
Yeah.
So it's actually about being curious. Be curious, communicate and be curious. How is that person changing? Ask them. And use your listening skills, because we can listen to someone, but unless we're hearing them and can show them that we're hearing them, because that's what every human wants. We want to be heard. We want to feel noticed. And so if we can reflect that back at that person, that's a really very simple tool, is to be able to listen and say, what I'm hearing that you're feeling is this. especially to a woman loves that. If you say something to your partner and then they reflect it back at you, and that's just, oh, okay, they've seen me, they've heard me. But the thing about projection and that assumption is we can be very triggered by things that our partners do, and then we project our own version of the world on them. And that's what James was saying right at the beginning. It's about taking responsibility, going, why am I triggered by that? Why am I triggered by what they're saying? How is that showing me something within myself that might need to be healed? Because actually I'm assuming that they mean that, but they might not be meaning that. So what's going on for me first and foremost?
Yeah. It's interesting because communication is key, but it's a strange time because your kids, if you have them, may be sort of on the cusp of getting into university or getting out into the job market. You might have older parents that are now becoming a little bit more challenging. So your time is quite stretched, isn't it? And often I think the relationship with your partner, your husband or your wife can maybe get pushed to one side sometimes. So finding that time is difficult. There was an analogy I heard once that I thought was really good, actually. It was like your relationship is like a plant and you've got to water it and feed it every day. Life goes on around it, work, kids, parents, careers, all that kind of stuff. And you've got to water that relationship every day to one degree or another. Just having a holiday booked for next summer isn't enough, is it?
No, it's, and everything you just said, like we actually liken it to a third person, if that makes sense. It sounds a bit weird, but there's you on your own, there's the other one on their own, and then there's this entity called the relationship, this almost third thing that, like you said, it needs to be watered, it needs to be looked after, it needs attention given to it. And I think some people can just think, oh, that just sounds so difficult given I'm so stretched in every other area of my life. And again, we make the assumption that that's going to water itself, that plant's going to water itself, and it just doesn't. And people might be overwhelmed thinking, oh, I've got to spend hours communicating. You would be surprised how 5 minutes, honestly, 5 minutes a day, maybe it's 5 minutes in the morning just to say, hey, what have you got? Looking in each other's eyes. If you need to shut the bathroom and hide from the kids for a few minutes, do that. But just say, hey, what have you got going on today? What's on your mind?
Yeah.
Give that person a moment to express that to you, you express it back, and then vice versa. At the end of the day, how was your day? And listen, and honestly, you would be surprised. It doesn't take more than 5 minutes in the morning and 5 minutes in the evening to start creating that deeper connection with each other.
Because people always think that it's got to be something bigger than that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it doesn't.
James, what would you say again? Other things that we can look to do to keep our relationships alive and a chance to grow it still and not just write it off, I suppose.
Yeah, well, like Claire said, I think it's not taking it for granted. And I think you touched on that. There's so much else going on in our lives. We kind of think, well, this is kind of the thing that's safe and all right, so I can afford to leave it. But you really can't afford to leave it. So I think the first step is recognizing that. The second step is you don't have to do massive things. It's small things, like just taking that 5 minutes in the morning to speak to each other about how you're feeling, what's going on for you emotionally that day, checking in again at the end of the day, making sure you do things like still organise date nights, because that's something that can go out the window. Lots of research shows that couples that do new things together tend to be happier. So, just finding new things to go and try together, do things. Think back to when you first met and you first started dating, you go off and do all kinds of things. So start doing stuff like that again. And my final thing would say, if you really feel you need it, therapy can be great, like going to couples therapy. I think we have a sense in this country for sure that you only go there if the relationship's in trouble, right? So if something's gone wrong, that's when you go to couples therapy. But actually, just having a third party to talk things through with and see the other partner's point of view, that kind of the objective third person in the room can be so helpful and really help deepen a relationship very fast.
Yeah, I mean we went through that ourselves, didn't we? It wasn't, we realised, because we work in a business together and we have done for the last 10 years, we can teach all this stuff, but it just happens. Like life happens sometimes, and you find yourself in a place where you haven't necessarily always communicated your feelings. Certain things might have happened in the past that you haven't necessarily worked out, that you might be harbouring, all of that stuff. And it's so, honestly, it was life-changing for us to be able to have that third person, just to be able, like James said, it wasn't because we were on the edge of breaking up. It's actually because we are so grateful for what we have, and we value it so much that we didn't want to undermine it. So, okay, let's go and have some outside therapy and talk some things through. And it was unbelievable for us. It was really, really amazing.
It's funny because I've heard a lot of people talk about therapy, and I think some people understand it, they appreciate it, they understand the value in it, whether it's a personal journey or whether it's with couples, but it's still, a lot of people still won't admit they need to speak to somebody else. It's interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think at our age demographic in particular, there's kind of a cultural thing there, particularly for British people. You know, when we speak to American clients, there's so much more. They've probably had like loads of therapists already, you know, or they're seeing several therapists at the same time for different things. Whereas I think we've still got this stiff upper lip, keep your problems to yourself. But over the long term, that doesn't really help. You know, talking these things out is so much more helpful. But I say, you know, there's many different types of therapy, and if you go and you don't have a great experience with one, don't write the whole thing off. You know, don't be afraid to go and try different therapists, different types of therapy, different modalities till you find what works for you.
And I would say just don't be ashamed. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? And I think that's why James and I have agreed to always talk as openly as we can about the fact that we've had therapy. Because on the outside, people can think that you've got it all covered.
Yeah.
We've been called the dream team like a million times. And, you know, and actually, we've always made a great team. Now we've been through therapy. Oh, my goodness. The team we make now is unbelievable. And I can say that with such an honour for what we've been through as a couple. But don't be ashamed. Don't think that just because you see the Joneses down the street and they look happy that they are. And actually, how much do you value your marriage? How much do you want to invest in it? Because actually what was really powerful for me was seeing James looked, we both agreed that we wanted to go to therapy, but James looked and found our therapist. And that said to me, as soon as he had done that said to me, he totally loves me. He totally values this. And even before we'd even been in for our first session, something already switched.
Interesting. So do you think that relationship and that strength between the two of you and others who feel strong together can play into a stronger foundation for how we feel in our, you know, in midlife and where we may head next? Is that a strong pillar, do you think, to help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we don't have that support by our partner, we can feel very lost at sea and alone. And we do see this a lot. You know, you see the values change of each individual. You see what they want change. It might even be to the point where that person's really taken hold of their health. We see that a lot. And they've really shifted into a gear of more self-love, self-respect. And the other partner might not necessarily have gone along with that, and that can cause a real rift, by the way. This is really common. It's almost like they have got a version of you that they feel comfortable with, and as soon as you go outside that mold, it's almost like a reflection on them. They feel uncomfortable because their narrative of you has changed. So that can be quite difficult to navigate. It's wonderful when one steps up and then the other one does. I think it's beautiful, and it doesn't matter which one it is. That's, I think, when the relationship really solidifies, actually, when one person might step up and the other one goes, oh, I love you so much. I'm interested in what you're doing. I'm curious. It's that word again. I'm curious about what you're doing. I'm curious about how you're growing. And it's about the other person being supportive. But yeah, I think relationships, you know, human beings are designed to be in relationship. We are designed to be in a tribe. We were never designed to be isolated. Isolation meant certain death. So, of course, when we have a strong foundation of a relationship, a partnership, it just gives you more a sense of safety, of possibility, that security, to actually start flourishing in your own ways, individually as well.
Yeah, I want to add something to that as well, because you touched on there. Obviously, your kind of, I guess, your romantic life partner relationship is super important, but your broader relationships as well, because all the research shows that social isolation massively increases our mortality risk. And again, this is men. All the research shows men are far less good than women at maintaining social networks, at opening up to their social networks. So it's just to say, you know, keep on out there, keep exploring, keep making new friends, new connections, and really make sure you're connecting with people.
moving forward in terms of what you feel you've learned through your own journeys of struggles and where you are now, and what have you learnt yourself having been on that journey? You know, what would you say to your younger selves, I suppose?
My goodness, because mine's massively changed. I had burnout at the beginning of last year and it changed everything. I mean, it literally changed everything. I've done so much growth. I hate that. It sounds really woo-woo, doesn't it? But I've done so much growth and personal healing. I think for me, it's like, try and be as present as you possibly can, actually. Be grateful for what you already have rather than constantly seeking happiness in some long lost future destination. You know, the expectations we have of what our life should look like is often the thing that damages us even getting there. You know, so actually be grateful, be present, have an eye on what lights you up. This whole finding your purpose thing, it can actually get quite stressful and everyone's kind of trying to out-purpose each other. You know, your purpose doesn't have to mean that you're going to change the world. It could be something that's a little bit quieter. It doesn't have to be this big, expansive epiphany. So be gentle with yourself. Follow your bliss. That's always a good thing to say. But biggest thing for me is trust in the journey, trust in the unfolding of what's happening. Don't try and control it so much because it doesn't look like how you want it to look. Be in your life rather than constantly looking for something outside of it.
James, thoughts from yourself?
I'd echo that. I'd say I think it's very easy in today's world to be dissatisfied with your lot in life. We have a lot of new technology pushing things at us. You know, social media gives us this illusion that we're seeing everyone else's lives, and of course everyone's posting their highlight reel, so we think everyone else has got something so much better than us, and it's something we haven't really had before in human evolution. So I'd say try and filter that out. Learn to be satisfied with what you have. Like, don't be afraid to not know stuff. It's okay not to know, but recognize that you don't know, and if you're curious about it, then make it your mission to know. My biggest advice is just stay curious, because when we stop growing, that's when we can start to really slide backwards. So just stay curious about life and keep exploring.
Brilliant. Moving forward for yourselves, what does the future look like for both of you in terms of, you know, I guess, work-life balance and what you're looking forward to with the business?
Yeah, well, work-life balance is actually about being, for me, like on a personal level, it's definitely about being more grounded in the present, more grounded in my faith, trusting more, just enjoying the journey, not always trying to validate myself, because that's where I was, validating myself with what I could achieve. And that's all been stripped away, and it's such a beautiful experience. So more of that, please. From a business perspective, I'm really letting that unfold, but I'm very, very drawn. Like, it's almost like I'm doing full circle, because back in my 20s, I was doing a lot of stuff in corporates, you know, stress management consultancy in the city, business coaching for Microsoft. I want to do more of that again. So more B2B stuff. And we've had some amazing clients like Google, KPMG, Citibank. So those ones have come to us. We kind of want to expand that. And that really excites me, especially around the issue of ageism and multi-generational workforces, all of that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm really focused, and actually supporting James. I'm so excited to be his wife. Really seeing him come into his own where he's helping midlife men. I think I'm hopefully doing a lot to support him in that area, and just doing more of that as well.
Yeah, for me, the corporate work, like Claire's saying, we've been very fortunate to have a lot just come our way unasked for. So definitely more of that, because it enables us to reach a large number of people at the same time. And I think we realise, you know, when you run your own business that's kind of direct to consumer, and that small group or one-to-one focus, it's very easy for that to start consuming more and more of your time, and you're constantly looking at the metrics and all the things. So we've made a conscious effort to step away from that. And actually, you know, for me, I think it's about, I'll use the word freedom in life. So, you know, taking that, we're putting an awful lot of pressure on ourselves, but actually releasing that pressure and going, okay, let's see what unfolds. Let's just actually speak our truths, be authentic, and see what comes of it. But aside from the corporate, my big thing is raising awareness of andropause, of this age-related low testosterone, and helping men in midlife kind of show up as better men, better partners, give them communication skills, the relationship skills, because guys, I think we need it, and we owe it to ourselves. So yeah, that's my big driver.
What would you say to a midlife man out there that is feeling a little bit out of sorts.
If you're a man, kind of 45 plus, and you've been feeling for a while like you're not quite yourself, like you're feeling a bit unhappy, maybe low level anxiety, lack of confidence, you're not quite sure where your life's going, then don't ignore that feeling because it is not going to go away on its own. Start researching what could be going on for you in terms of low testosterone. Look at the impact that can have on you physically, psychologically, emotionally, and then start educating yourself about what you can do from a lifestyle perspective. And don't be afraid to reach out for support. And I think as men, let's start talking to each other about how we're feeling and the steps we're taking.
Lovely. And Claire, what would you say to the women out there of midlife?
Listen, I know that the perimenopause and the menopause is a tough old time. It's also a really, really exciting time where we go through our chrysalis and we turn into butterflies, where we reclaim our wisdom, our power, where we really prioritize our own well-being. So really try as much as you can to see this as this second act of your life, which is full of possibility, full of excitement and full of wisdom. And yeah, I would just really, really encourage women to see the benefits of aging, because there are so many. It's about the lens that we look, it's the narrative we tell ourselves, it's the lens that we look through. So that would be my thing, is to reclaim the power, reclaim our prioritization of our own self-care.
Love it. James, Claire, thank you so much for sharing lots of different bits and bobs there. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And, continued success with, all your business ventures and your personal life and your relationship and the work you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Simon. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode. A huge thank you to Claire and James for joining me today and sharing some really fantastic insights, from talking about purpose to understanding how our shifts in hormones can affect us both physically and emotionally. Claire and James really reminded us of the power of communication and the importance of self-awareness, and how support can be a game changer for relationships. Whether it's therapy, staying curious, or even seeing midlife as an opportunity rather than a crisis, there are so many ways to make this stage of life transformative. I hope you're taking away some actionable insights as to how this may apply to your journey. If you'd like to learn more about Claire and James and the incredible work they're doing, please take a look at the show notes. I'll include all of their details in there, and of course a link to their podcast, The Midlife Mentors. Thanks again for listening. If you found any parts of this conversation useful, then please share the conversation with as many as you can. And of course, subscribe on the channel of your choice so we can travel this journey together. But that's it. Until next time, take care and goodbye.